Hey everyone, Arms here, and today we have received a very special announcement from Realogic and Chippy Gaming, and that is the announcement of Terraria's 1.4.4 Labor of Love update. As many of you remember, a few months ago, Terraria very deservedly won the Labor of Love award, which is now going to be almost 11 years of regular updates. And because of that, many of us have been speculating about this update. There have also been many hints from the devs on Twitter, most importantly, Senex actually having a debug version shown on her computer from a post she made on Twitter, and other tweets that you could refer to as subtweets, potentially hinting at this update. Now, many people might hear this and they'll think potentially a new big update, but this is intended to be a much smaller balance and convenience based update to create greater ease of replayability in the game, as well as adding a few extra niceties to make the game a bit more streamlined overall. There were a few announcements of guaranteed features coming in the update in Chippy's video, and I will link that down below if you haven't already seen it. That being said, I wanted to get into my own personal wish list for this update. Since it's being labeled as a balance-based update, there are actually a lot of changes that I think can be made to the Summoner class in particular to make it a less polarizing class overall, as I find that people in the community either really hate or really love the Summoner class. So hopefully these changes can help balance it a little bit and make it more fun for everyone. There hasn't been an announcement for the date in which the update is being released, so whether they could have enough time to implement some of these changes, I might suggest is up in the air. However, it does leave the opportunity for them to be potentially included in Terraria 2, whether or not that's Relogic next game or it's one of their future, hopefully many future titles, that is. That being said, let's get into some of my recommended changes. Now, I sort of have two sections of potential recommended changes, and that is general changes and maybe some new items along the way as well. So, starting off with some of the general changes I want to suggest, I want to start off with the hard mode armors that you can get for the Summoner in Terraria. Now, I think these armors are pretty good in almost every aspect except for one, and that's probably pretty obvious, and that's defense. The defense you get from these armors is just absolutely pitiful. And I don't even really see the reason why the Tiki armor and the Spooky armor are balanced this way with this huge defense drop off, where the Tiki armor actually has more defense but slightly less damage, and this one has much more damage but less defense. I think you can just rebalance these overall and make it just a pure direct upgrade rather than like sort of you can choose between the two of them, right? And I think all of them deserve a considerable defense boost, least of them being the spider armor. I think what you could do is you could boost the defense of the forbidden armor, boost everything forbidden armor and up in defense, and actually make the forbidden armor maybe a little more minion damage and keep the two minions, and then that could balance it, and it could be like a direct upgrade to the spider armor potentially. And keep the spider armor pretty low defense, because you can get it right at the beginning of hard mode, so making it too strong might not be good. So I think this one you could potentially keep the same and make everything else a bit better. But definitely at least hollowed armor up and into the Stardust armor, which we'll get into a second, need, in my opinion, massive defense boosts. Now, that being said, I did mention the Stardust armor, and we can get into part 2 of this armor discussion, and that is the Stardust armor itself. Now, here I have the Stardust armor at the top, 38 defense, and I have the Old One's Army's armor you can get after defeating one mechanical boss. And as you can see, the armors are either almost comparable, basically comparable, or below the Stardust armor out of the water in terms of defense. This, in my opinion, is totally unreasonable. There's no reason the Squire armor should have this much more defense than the Stardust armor. I get the Stardust armor gives you so much more damage, but the defense disparity between this post Moonlord armor, you have to defeat Moonlord at least twice to be able to get this armor. Maybe once if you're really lucky and you use all of your Luminite on just the armor, but I'm pretty sure you need to defeat the Moonlord at least twice. And for only 38 defense, it's absolutely pitiful. I don't think there's an excuse for it being this low in terms of defense. And frankly, all of the Summoner armors are just way too low in defense. But the Stardust armor in particular is just so egregious when, and it is especially obvious when you compare its 38 total defense to the Squire armor's 56 total defense, and you can get the Squire armor just after defeating one mechanical boss. Now, there is a little bit of balance in this, and that sentries kind of suck. So it makes sense that these armors have so much more defense because, like, sentries aren't very redeeming. In fact, in my opinion, the only boss that sentries are viable against is the golem. For obvious reasons, you have a very limited space to interact in anyway, generally speaking. Square armor is pretty underrated, I think. But that's a whole other conversation. Here, as we go back to here, just like seeing these defense numbers, they're just so low. The molten armor, so if we were to look at like the molten armor, which is a pre-hard mode armor, its defense is 25, basically rivaling the forbidden armor, which takes either titanium or adamantium, which just, it does not feel right. I know the idea of the low defense in the summoner armors is that because summons are doing so much damage that you don't have to do, and it's damage that you don't even have to focus on, they're just doing it without you even paying attention. You can focus all of your attention on dodging. However, there is a core problem with most of the summons in the game, which I'm actually going to be talking about a lot in future videos, particularly a tier list of the summon weapons in the game coming up soon, in which if you actually get too far away from the enemy, your summons aren't doing that much damage. So the privilege of having your minions do damage for you and being able to dodge is nerfed significantly by the fact that you need to stay very close to most bosses to actually be able to do damage to them. So because you're forced to stay so close, your ability to dodge just is totally nerfed in a very annoying way, particularly at the higher difficulties of Terraria, like Master Mode, and potentially Master Mode for the worthy. That being said, I think there are other things that you could do to potentially balance this out. I don't think you necessarily need to make the armors better. I have some ideas that I'll be going over later, which could circumvent this potentially. It can circumvent potentially buffing the armors. And another suggestion I would make is if you don't want to rebalance these too much, making the old one armies armors better potentially, like giving them sentry capacity and minion capacity potentially could be interesting. That might make them too powerful. I haven't really thought about that much. I don't use them. These armors are more based around dual classing. However, dual classing can be a bit overpowered in my opinion, and I generally prefer to stick to one singular class, particularly for challenge runs in which you can only use that one class, and working for your first item can oftentimes be very difficult, and certain bosses can be difficult because you're restricting yourself to one class, and therefore the weaknesses of that class could affect certain bosses or certain events. Moving on from that, one of the next things I potentially wanted to cover was new potential items that could be added. Now, we know from Chippy's video that they're going to be adding at least one new item, and that is a pet, to be fair. It's a combination of the Master Mode pets from the King Slime and the Queen Slime. So you could summon both of those pets at the same time. That's pretty cool. I like that. I like that change. Apparently, really early on in 1.4, a Reddit post went viral for someone asking for that item. And it's really, Relogic has a history of seeing what the community asks for and really taking a hold, really like saying, oh, this is a great idea. Let's use these great ideas. They're not afraid to take advice from the community. And I think that just shows their dedication to the community and why this labor of love award, rather, why this labor of love award is even coming out, or this labor of love update, rather, is coming out in the first place. So as far as new items go, I don't think you need too many potential new items. One oftentimes type of item you'll see in mods is where you can take things like the Papyrus Scarab and like the Summoner Emblem and maybe even one of these and like combine them all into a super OP item. I don't think you need that. I think that could be make the Summoner class too overpowered. However, one suggestion that I have, which I don't think would be that overpowered, would be potentially taking something like the Berserker's Glove or the Power Glove. It could be either. I would prefer the Berserker's Glove because I like to use it for the 8 defense. And you could take the Berserker's Glove and the Summoner Emblem and then combine them into an item which gives you the minion damage and all of the benefits that you get from the gloves, as in all whips are auto swing and you get some increased whip speed. Now, this would just free up an extra accessory slot to which you can then equip more survivability-based items, which the summoner desperately needs. So this can be a sort of way of circumventing the need to rebalance the armors too much, right? Maybe, and you could even do a combination of these things where you give the armors, like you give each of the armors just a tad bit more defense, but then, add this new item that would be a combination of the summoner's emblem and the berserker's glove, or maybe even the power glove. It can be either, in my opinion. I would prefer the berserker's glove for the defense because the summoner really needs that, and having that combination of item can free up just one extra accessory slot to give you something for survivability, which is desperately needed with the summoner because of just the lack of survivability. That being said, there's one other thing that I wish, that is more of a personal wish of mine, and that is a rebalancing of the whips potentially. And by that I mean whips, except for maybe like the kaleidoscope and the morning star, and even then, at the point you are in the game, you still want them to be longer. Whips overall have very sad length without the obsidian armor. The obsidian armor here, let's go up and find it right here. So the obsidian armor, as most of us know, gives a 35% whip speed boost and a 50% whip range increase. This 50% whip range increase is actually insane, and I don't think the obsidian armor deserves it. I think the obsidian armor is great. However, I think what I would prefer more, and I think what most of the community would prefer more, is maybe a slightly lower whip range increase on the obsidian armor, and then giving like maybe a 25% increase on the obsidian armor, and then giving bigger increases to the later armors potentially. So maybe a way you can balance the spooky armor and the tiki armor is maybe you can keep the spooky armor having a lower defense, but then give it a whip range increase that the tiki armor maybe doesn't have. So then you can still keep, if they want to keep that, sort of, you can choose between the two elements that these armors have, as they have pros and cons to each of them. Then that can be an even greater increase of, okay, the spooky armor does a lot more damage, but then it still has the lower defense. That is something that you could potentially do if they want to keep this dynamic between these two armors. Definitely giving the 50% to the Stardust armor, I think, is more deserved, to make it feel like a super, super powerful endgame armor, I think that's definitely very deserved. And another thing that I can say is, if they don't want to add whip range increases to the later game armors, maybe potentially just giving whip range increases to these, to some of the later game whips, maybe Durandal and on, I think could be appropriate. Could be very appropriate, and then it's still nerfing this whip range increase from the obsidian armor, so then it doesn't make the obsidian armor too crazy with its whip range increase, as you will be increasing these passively. And one more thing I can say in terms of new items is, one thing I would love for them to add more than most of the things I've listed in this video is that potentially giving us a pre-boss sentry. I dream of being able to do a sentry only playthrough, but it's functionally impossible because you have to at least defeat one boss to get a sentry. And maybe potentially adding something in a golden chest underground, something that drops from an enemy, maybe, I think could go a long way in making another one of these fun challenge playthroughs that the community can take on. And maybe just a general buff to sentries overall. I know they are buffing the time in which they stay out. In the in Chippy's video, he mentions that the sentry timer is going to be increased from 2 minutes to 10 minutes. I think it should be even greater than that. I think it should potentially be infinite. However, one of the best parts about sentries is you can resummon them to shoot them, and they shoot automatically. So that's a whole other discussion topic, whether they even need to be past 10 minutes. We'll have to see when the update comes out potentially. But I think adding just an extra sentry here, I think it could be an interesting item to find in a golden chest. Drop from an enemy, maybe. What enemy that could be, I'm not exactly sure. That's why I think golden chests would just be easier. This is a big maybe. They could add it to wooden chests in the early game as another early game summon item that you can get. But I think the early game summon items we can get are pretty good right now. You have two very easy ones to get. Abigail's Flower and Finch Staff. They're unfortunately both tied to RNG. The Abigail's Flower is more controlled RNG, although I do think the spawn rate for it on non-constant worlds is pretty low. Another thing that I could say is I wish that they can add potentially increased spawn rate for the first Abigail's Flower that spawns in your world, and then everyone after that has the same rare spawn rate in non-constant worlds. Just because I think just getting that first one, because it's so weak, getting early would be very useful, and it could be a way to make more consistent summoner runs overall, rather than hopefully needing to rely on a world in which you get a Finch staff or collecting enough bestiary logs to get the zoologist to spawn in for the leather whip. Some people might wonder why I don't mention the overall balance of summon weapons in the game, since this is a balance-based update. And I believe that's already a topic that the community has discussed quite a bit. And I'm sure that they are aware of it, and I hope that they make some changes. And even if they don't, I'm pretty happy with it. I have my I have my own personal progression path for the summon weapons. And as most people do for their favorite class, they have their preferred progression path to get through the game. Obviously, not every single weapon can be balanced perfectly, and I think we have a very wide range of minions that are very unique and very diverse, and just like so many fitting so many different play styles, so many different things you can do. Um, I know they're increasing the drop rate of all rare pirate stuff. So hopefully the pirate staff can be dropped a bit more commonly, so that like you can get it earlier on and use it while it's still useful, because its usefulness drops off insanely quickly. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about. I'm really excited for this update. I know many of us are. And the fact that it's purely a balance update, we don't have to worry about any new content, or we don't have to worry about much new content, rather, as we already know they're going to be adding a few new items, at least. Hopefully hopefully some of my suggestions can either reach them, or they're already in the plan, as I think these are pretty obvious things the community has discussed for a while. This is just my own personal take on this stuff and what you can do. I appreciate you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'm very excited for this update. I have more videos coming soon. Peace out. Have a great day.